Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our Facebook fans, AgroGrace customers. On behalf of AgroGrace, I just want a special welcome to you all, and I will work with you this afternoon to answer as many questions as possible about growing orchids. I'll start off with a question we have from Michelle Williams. And Michelle's question relates to what types of orchids are available from AgroGrace and how do we care for the different varieties. So Michelle, I let you know that we sell a range of orchid varieties. We have our sun vandas or vanda terets and mocaras. Those two are ideally sunny type. They bloom best when placed in full sun and located in rocks, gravel, or charcoal. Michelle's question relates to what type. We do shade vandas, Michelle, and the name describes shade. Hang under your tree or put in your shade house or any in the direct sun. And those basket, and we also have available at AgroGrace stores the wooden vanda basket. Those don't require a potting mix in roots hanging. They just need to be watered frequently so the roots can be moist and absorb the water on a regular basis. Once per day is adequate. We sell the phalaenopsis. These sphagnum moss, and we encourage our gardeners to replace the sphagnum moss and plant in phalaenopsis mix or an orchid mix. Those customers who prefer to grow in the sphagnum moss are welcome to do so, but one thing is clear is you have to ensure that they are not watered too frequently. The sphagnum moss must be dried out before you rewater, as the excess moisture can result in damage to your roots and you will lose your plants very easily. Then we have our oncidiums, and these two you remove the sphagnum moss preferably when you purchase from AgroGrace and repot in orchid bark or charcoal with a mixture of bark or the general orchid mix that has in charcoal, bark, and some other planting medium. We do sell other plants that are not orchids, such as the adenium and the euphorbia. Those normally come at the same time as the orchids. But in general, we have the shade vandas, the oncidiums, the phalaenopsis, the mocaras, the vanda teret, and of course the very popular dendrobium. And those are grown in orchid mix or charcoal or gravel, preferably charcoal or gravel, so that you don't have too much moisture being retained around the roots of your dendrobium. And those are pretty easy to care for. They bloom right throughout the year, and those do well in semi-shade. If you're going into the sun with your dendrobium, you will need to slowly move it out into the sun. And here we have a question from Nelmac. Nelmac wants to know, what is the best orchid to grow in your home? The best here, Nelmac, is relative. So for example, if the space you have to grow your orchids is a full sun, no shade, then my recommendation would be to have your mocaras or the vanda teret. Those do extremely well in the sun. You'll find if you have them in an area where they get significant shade throughout the day, they bloom less throughout the year. If you have shade and sun, then dendrobium is one of the easiest to grow. So you could select dendrobium for a semi-shade area, like under a tree or behind the house, wherever you get even half day of shade and sun as a combination. So what you choose to plant in terms of growing orchid will be dependent to an extent on the environment in which you have. Most of the orchids that we sell at AgroGrace are quite adaptable to the varying climatic conditions in Jamaica. You'll find like the epidendrum and the a few others that cool areas. Jason Pinnock has a question here for us. Thank you, Jason. And your question is, what is the best season to grow orchids? It's always best to get your orchids in the cooler months. And we tend to have our orchids available like in May and October, November. That allows you to get the plants much easier. But if you happen to access orchids in the summer months when it's pretty hot and dry, then the key is to move the plants into the coolest area of your outdoor, away from the direct sun, and you have them in that shaded area for an extended period, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before you creep them out into the direct sun if they are sun-loving plants. So you pretty much grow your orchids right throughout the year. During the very wet period, you need to put a lot of focus on making sure that you have your fungicide on your orchids as protection. And this is critical to ensure you prevent any disease growth and development on your plants, because some of the orchids, like the phalaenopsis, are pretty susceptible to diseases, and in the wet conditions they flourish more. During the summer months, what you will find happening is, because of the heat intensity and the dry conditions, you tend to get more insect problems. So you have to look out for and treat for insects during the hotter months. And we have a range of products which we can recommend for you to use for that. Let's see if we have another question coming in from one of our customers. Michelle may have something else here. Let's see. Michelle may have another question, but until we get back to Michelle's question, I will just mention briefly about some of the pests and diseases that are common on orchids. Do we have any more questions there in the meantime? Aphids, mites, thrips, whiteflies, mealybugs, slugs, and snails. These are some of the common pests that will affect your orchids. Some of these pests you will notice readily. So for example, the slugs you can't miss. The slugs will crawl onto your plants, and they love dendrobiums. They will defoliate your dendrobium overnight if the condition is ideal. So for your slugs and snails, the deadline is what we have at AgroGrace, and it's a highly effective product. Just to emphasize that if you have pets around, make sure you place it in an area where the pets cannot access them, because we wouldn't want any fatalities there, would we? I'll get back to the pests and diseases in a while, as I take this question from Nicole Levy. How can I repot my orchids? Okay, Nicole, without knowing for sure what type of orchids you have, let's start with dendrobium. Then the one that has that cane-like stalk and the foliage comes off, and popular orchids that are grown in Jamaica and elsewhere in the world too. So if you have a dendrobium that needs to be repotted, my recommendation would be for you to first immerse the pot in water and soak for a few minutes. That way it will assist with the relocation of the plant from the pot without too much damage to the roots. If the roots are well anchored to the pot, my recommend you it doesn't affect your orchids. If you're having any difficulty pulling the entire plant out without damaging the pot, then just break away the sides of the pot, because in any event, by the time your orchids get to the point where they need repotting, chances are you have a mass of roots and a number of canes in there for separation. So you take the plant out from the existing pot. You're going to get your pruner and you will clip off the damaged roots, and you will know the roots that are damaged or dead, because after soaking, the ones that have good moisture and are alive will tend to have a greenish appearance, and the ones that are dead or dying or damaged, you will notice the crack lines, the broken areas, or very dark brown or black looking, which means it's pretty dead. You prune those off. Then you separate the canes using your pruner to clip through any difficult areas so you won't damage your orchid. And dendrobium, get your new pots, put a layer of gravel at the bottom, then you place your dendrobium in. And the next time around, we're going to make sure we do some live demonstrations so there won't be any guessing in what we're doing. But for now, the shortened form of it is to take the orchid out, separate the canes if it's a dendrobium, and then you will get multiple pots in doing your repotting. It's always best, if you want to keep a clutter of the plants without separating, that you get a larger pot so you're potting up, which allow more space for more orchids to go up. But there are some orchids which are going to keep in your pots without needing to repot unless it is damaged. So for example, your shade vanda that you have placed in the vanda basket, that pretty much remains there unless over time the basket is broken, you know, with the moisture. If you're in a very cool area with high humidity, over time you'll find decomposition takes place and you just pot up into a larger one so you won't damage the roots in doing so. And that's it for Nicole's question. Michelle, are orchids in stock at the AgroGrace locations all year? And that's an interesting question coming from Michelle there. Interesting in the sense that AgroGrace has only one shade house at the moment, and we prefer to keep our orchids in a more controlled environment. So at one of our locations, Michelle, in fact, our AgroGrace store in Mandeville, we orchids available and sometimes in bloom. If you're lucky, they should get something in bloom. But for the other AgroGrace locations, it's really so the ending of May or the ending of May or the ending of October is usually when we have our very exciting orchid sale, Michelle. So stay tuned with us and we will keep you informed on the next one that we have coming up in varieties. And here I have a question from Nicole. Okay, I'll take Nicole's question and then go to Janelle's. Why won't my orchids rebloom? I would have loved to be able to ask Nicole a few questions, and if she has the time, she could respond by sending in the answer to my questions. But my suspicion of why your orchids might not be bloom, there are varying reasons why they might not rebloom. If you have a heavy pest infestation on your orchids, Nicole this time, you may find that be a bloom. So have the plants examined. If it's convenient for you to take one into our location, we could take a look at it. But you could have pest infestation, which reduces the probability of blooming. It could be that it shorts some nutrients. Have you been fertilizing? What have you been using as your fertilizer? How frequently have you been doing it? It's good for you to invest in some soluble fertilizer for foliar application, where you mix and you spray onto the foliage of your orchids. And I would recommend you consider putting in some insecticide. Something like a Carartesian or NGO would be a good selection without me knowing what exactly you have as a pest on as a pest. Okay, Janelle, let me see. I think I might have an answer from Janelle here. Nicole, I'm sorry, Nicole. Let's see, Nicole, my orchids are indoor. That can be the greatest enemy to your orchids, Nicole. If they're indoor and you have the area locked up during the day and it gets pretty warm inside, that could affect your orchids, Nicole. The orchids ideally are from the wild, where you have free flowing air, the natural airflow, and therefore I usually recommend and practice for myself that I don't keep my orchids indoor for too long. Once you've enjoyed the bloom, then you should relocate your plant outdoor on your patio or under a tree where you can get to water very frequently and you can get to do your spraying. So I suspect with you having it indoor, you might not be watering it as frequently as it should be watered. You may have insects, pests that are not to be treating them. So the first thing is to get your orchid outdoor. Invest in having some foliar fertilizer and an insecticide or two so you can rotate, and we can continue the follow-up with you there to see what progress you have with your orchids in bloom for the upcoming holidays next year. Michelle, what are the best products to use for disease-related problems in orchids? Thank you, Michelle. We have a range of, there's a range of pesticides that you can use. I would recommend you get a combination of a systemic fungicide. A good contact to have is Sancozeb. Why Sancozeb? It's pretty reasonably low cost, I may say, and it's a broad spectrum, so it handles a wide range of disease problems. And then you would need to have in your storage at least one systemic. So you could consider looking at Amistar or Rivas, and Ridamil is a very good one to have. So from those four mentioned, there are others, but I won't encourage you to buy too many one time. But if you have a wide range of plants, then you can certainly look at more. But you should have at least Sancozeb and Amistar or Ridamil or Rivas in combination in your storage, and you rotate them. I must point out to you, however, Michelle, that if you use Ridamil, you don't need to follow with Sancozeb immediately after. And there you could rotate with Amistar. My reason for making that recommendation is that the active ingredient in Sancozeb is also more or less the same product repeatedly. So it would be like too much of the same product used continuously. All right, audience question is coming up. So while audience question is coming up, I'll just continue to mention some of the insecticides that we can use for the popular pests that affect orchids. Carartesian handles a wide range. It handles aphids, thrips, and other insects. We have Actara, and whitefly do affect a wide range of plants, and you could find them on your orchids too. So there's Actaro, Ngeo, Caratizion, Silicon. Those are some of the popular insecticides that you could use in a rotation. And I'm emphasizing rotation because you certainly do not want to use the same pesticide continuously. Reasons for that: if you use the same pesticide continuously, you increase the probability of a resistance buildup, which means that the pest would have gotten so accustomed to that product, and over time you won't find you're getting the optimum effect from the use of it. So it's best to rotate. And when you rotate, you will also increase your chance of using a pesticide that will treat or cure the problems that are different. So depending on the insect or disease range you have, you would want to make sure you vary. Let me see what Odine has here now. Nutrition is critical to plant growth. Agree with you, Odine? Could you please provide recommendations on the type of nutrients orchids require? Orchids require nutrients for the root development. Like most plants, they need nutrients for the roots to be developed, for the foliage to be developed, and for you to get blooms and sustain the blooms. I'll mention firstly that magnesium sulfate, which is popularly known as Epsom salt, that is a good product to mix out and spray onto all your plants, not just orchids, because it enhances the foliage development and the bloom development. For root development, you need something with nitrogen content. Then you have sorry, for your foliage, you're going to need the nitrogen Odine. For your root development, you need a phosphate, and to enhance your blooming, and that's just putting it in the very simplest form, you need the potassium. So when you go to an AgroGrace or any garden center to select a product for feeding your orchids, and they do respond positively to getting some feed, what we recommend you do is look for something that has a combination of what is commonly known as NPK, which is your nitrogen, phosphorus, and your potassium. But your plants also need micronutrients. So with that in mind, you want to select a product that has the major nutrients, which is the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but you also want to get one that has in some micronutrients, the magnesium and the calcium and the zinc and manganese and all those other micronutrients. And there's a range that you can choose from. We do have a range in store. So feel free to call us, give us a call, and we can provide you with a listing for you to select from. The Better Grow brand is a popular one amongst a lot of our orchid customers. We have it in the bloom boosters, and the bloom boosters are usually highly sought after and used close to the point where your plants are spiked. And when you put that high nutrient content onto your plants just at the spiking stage, it enhances the length and the size of the spike, the size of your blooms, and the continued flowering of your plants. Okay, I mentioned about the deadline for your slugs and snails, and just to emphasize that wherever you have your plants, your orchids are going to be likely to be embedded in a lot of rocks, gravel, charcoal, organic matter in the form of wood chips and orchid bark. And those environments, when you have very damp conditions like the rainy period we're experiencing now, there will be a tendency for you to see a large number of slugs and snails crawling out, and they are nocturnal, so in the night is when they go in and do their damage. So it is best for you to make sure you have some deadline, get in and sprinkle it around the border of your garden, or if you have potted plants, then you could just sprinkle some of the pellets in the pot, and that is very effective in keeping those pests away. I've been an early question from Michelle about the popular orchids we do import, but from time to time we'll bring in specialty items, and we also encourage our gardeners to, or orchid enthusiasts and professional orchid growers, to continue to give us your feedback and request on any special needs you have so that we can satisfy those needs. One of the things I want to point out to our orchid customers is that when there are new pesticides on the market, it's good to add it to your storage or your list of pesticides that you have, because AgroGrace works with some of the most reputable manufacturers that are on the cutting edge worldwide, such as Syngenta, to name one. And therefore, whatever we bring to market are going to be pesticides that are lower in toxicity and, more interestingly, lower in the dosage. So you will find, like some of the traditional pesticides, the general recommendation is 1 tablespoon or 15 mils per 3 water. What you're finding with most of the new products we have, like the Revus and the NGO and a fungicide and insecticide, the dosage is so low, it's almost incredible. Even when I'm mixing it myself, I have to double check the instructions to see if I'm using too low a dosage. And because the dosages you're talking about, instead of a 15 mils, you're looking at 5 mils, 2.5 mils per 4 liters of water. That's just the environment and onto your plants. A product that is less toxic to the user and the environment, and a product that is also a lower dosage. So what you're finding is that it's less chemical going out there into the environment, and we're very proud to be on the leading role in bringing to market more products that are low. So if you don't have Revus or NGO in your portfolio, those are 2 good products to have in there because they're highly effective. One is a combination of 2 molecules, the active ingredient from Carartesian and from Actara. So you get a potent drug with a very low application rate. And the Revus is a new molecule, and therefore the chance of a disease resistance buildup is going to be very low. At this time of the year, or any time of the year when you have very wet conditions, persons who have their phalaenopsis in the sphagnum moss have to be extremely cautious, and it would be best to shift them to a location where they're either not getting the direct rainfall or a reduced amount. Sometimes you have to shift them to a covered area like on your patio, because the excess moisture, you will find that you lose them. Orchids love to be watered, but they certainly do not like to sit in water. Let me see this question here, which must be a follow-up one from Odine Bradshaw. A friend of mine told me once that I should select my pot, plastic or clay, based on the variety of orchid. Is this true? Yes, it is absolutely true. It is best to put your orchids that are very succulent or the more delicate ones, orchids like your Oncidium and your Phalaenopsis, and even the Cattleya. I recommend you put those in, and the Cattleya I did not mention to Michelle. Hopefully she's still tuned in and will pick up on that, because the Cattleya is one of the most awesome bloom, I believe, when they unfold. But the clay pots allow the roots to breathe more, And therefore, the phalaenopsis, the oncidiums, and the cattleya, I strongly recommend you use the clay pot. The dendrobiums are somewhat hardier, and likewise your macaras and your vanda terret. So the plastic pots are better options or comfortable options. If you prefer more limitation, disadvantage all your pot in clay, but certainly you don't want to go with clay pots. You don't want pots for your and the oncidiums and the cattleya, because the clay just allows for better drainage and, you know, more aeration, more ventilation of your root system, which makes them happier, and happier plants will give you better results in the short and long term. Chanel, what should I look for when buying an orchid? Regardless of the type of orchid you're purchasing, Janelle, you want to make sure you have good root system. It doesn't have to be an excessive number of roots, but they need to be healthy roots. If you pick up an orchid, bare root here, I'm assuming, and your orchid doesn't show like it has any healthy roots on it, then you don't want to go with that option. If the roots are dead, you will know easily because they get very discolored. Instead of having a slight grayish, greenish appearance, they tend not to be very green looking unless there's moisture there where they have been watered or rehydrated shortly before put on display. But certainly you will know the healthy roots because they look pretty filled out, like when you have you know, something filled with water, and it is very sturdy and healthy looking. And the damaged roots or the dead roots would be brown or dark looking and all shriveled. And if you were to scratch the tip with your finger, you'll notice that there's no living tissue there because it's all black or brown. So you want to look at the root system. You want to look at the foliage. Let's say you were to see pale yellow orchids or any sign of any spotting, really overcome those challenges by giving them what I love to call TLC, just giving them some tender loving care by putting on the right fungicide and insecticide and some nutrients, and you will overcome that with time. But certainly you want to make sure that your plant is healthy looking, robust, turgid leaves, and good root system, and you can work the magic with the rest, working with the AgroGrace team, guiding you through what to do to care for it going forward. If I buy the flower, though, will I still need fertilizer? Okay, if you're purchasing an orchid which is already established, potted and in blooms, you can enjoy it for a while without needing to fertilize it. So let's say you bought it and you want to decorate your living room or dining room with it for the holidays, you pretty much can have it there. But I would encourage you from time to time to take it outdoor and at least immerse the pot in a mixture of the foliar fertilizer. And you don't have to go too strong with the mixture. You can go like about a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons to a gallon of water, or 30 mils, 10 mils to 4 liters of water using the metric. Michelle Williams, I listened to you advise Janelle repurchasing of orchids. My question though, isn't there any way that we can revive an orchid that looks shriveled or does not have a perfect root system? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that damaged roots, if once the orchid has good foliage, Michelle, it tells you that the plant still has some promise for a good future. Typically, when you examine the root system of an orchid, you will find some damaged roots, and those you can always remove with a clean pruner. But if you have absolutely find that to be the exception, experience with our orchids would have, but shipping, you will have some damage. You get rid of the damaged ones and you will find that you'll have new growth, new feeder roots coming out over time. So yes, you can survive with some damaged roots, but you must have some healthy roots there. If you have, and there are some that are broken, then you can cut off the broken section and leave the upper portion and it will survive. So you're right about that, but make sure that there are at least some healthy portions here. If it's all dead, then the plant is dying. And chances are, if all the roots are dead, you would have known without even examining, because the foliage would not be looking robust and healthy. Kaz Brown, is there a specific type of fertilizer that AgroGrace recommend? Does AgroGrace sell it, and how is it applied? We have more than one type of fertilizer that I would better grow, which comes in both liquid form and in the solid or crystal form. And most of these fertilizers are usually from 1 to 2 tablespoons per gallon of water. To keep it consistent with the metric, you're looking at 15 mils to 30 mils of. We also have other fertilizers that we purchase from our other business partners locally, and those are available in different brands, but the Better Grow brand is one of the favorite amongst most of the orchid lovers, and it's available at the AgroGrace stores. And you either select the blossom booster, or you can select the regular orchid fertilizer depending on the stage your plant is at. If it's near bloom, then that's what you would select. Then you would select the blossom booster. Now, I want to mention to all our listeners, viewers, and those participating with the question sending in, that when you purchase your pesticides, you should give very keen attention to the label. Make sure that the label remains intact, because it provides good information on the dosage that you should use. And most of these fertilizers can be used on other ornamentals. Michelle will purchase orchids and the leaves are yellowish or brownish. Purchasing this should be avoided then, or do I just observe the stem of the plant, make sure it's healthy, and trim the leaves? All right, it's a combination here. If you have brownish leaves, you can always clip those. The good thing with most orchids is that they will bounce back. If it's a fallen leaves, unless I'm seeing where the yellow is not a pale yellow, where it's just a nutrient deficiency, all yellow and looking like it's on. I would consult with someone when I'm picking up a phalaenopsis if all the leaves are yellow, because it could be a signal that something is wrong at the root system and the plant might be dying. But in principle, where you have discolored leaves, yellowish or brownish, it's really just in principle a matter of removing those damaged leaves and or feeding if it's just yellowish from nutrient deficiency. So it's a combination of looking at the leaves, the stem portion, and the root system, and trimming up. And the reality is that if it is seeming borderline and you give it the right care, then it can bounce back. And it brings to mind a recommendation of the use of Super Thrive. Super Thrive is a hormone which it's literally one drop, like an eye drop, that you put into 4 liters of water, and that helps to boost, just like with human beings, where you need to get a boost with your vitamins and help the system to survive disease conditions. The Super Thrive helps with that. So if you were to pick up a plant that looks a bit shaky, unless of any major diseases, then you can pick it up, trim it up, soak it, spray it, pot it up, put it in the shade, and nurture it back to reality. And I have another question here for another viewer. When you buy a bare root, how long before you see a bloom? My answer to that is that it varies. It's gonna vary depending on the stage of orchid you buy, and it's going to vary based on the and the care you give it. Start show you the yes. When you buy Phalaenopsis, bare is already spikes, that long stem looking, that spiral looking portion on the side, the base of the leaves there, and will bloom within a few weeks. That for myself and customers, first weekend in November of this year have blooms already that is spike, and you put it in the ideal condition, you'll get, when you get like a Mocara or a Sunbun, find that depending on some hybrids, which are the miniature types, and those tend to bloom within a few months. But again, I caution you, if you just put it down the right shade condition or the right lighting condition and put on some insecticide and fungicide, one customer will have a different experience from the other. So they all need to get some extra care to boost them because they're living things. But there are other plants that pretty much might take over a year. And this is why I like to encourage our orchid customers to have a range, various types, so that when one type is not in bloom, you'll get an early blooming from the other. And that's the excitement about it. The dendrobiums, once they start blooming, they will bloom right throughout the year. Some varieties bloom more frequently than others, and they continue to send out new shoots. So you're building up your population at the same time. Sunvandas and sunvandas that are neglected, and mocaras, those in the full sun, those that are neglected will be less rewarding, because during the hot months, as I might have mentioned earlier, you tend to get a flare up of insect infestation. The thrips and the mites and the aphids and others tend to love to feed on those areas, and that puts it under extra stress. But the moment you go in, put in some nutrients, whether it be the Better Grow or any other branded AgroGrace cell that you choose, and you spray it on and water it, then you're gonna see spikes just start coming all over, and that's just pretty awesome. It's a little cooler now. Is there any special way to care for orchids in the cooler months? There are some orchids that tend to bloom more in the cooler seasons, and there are some that tend to slow down. But in general, the general principle, cool months like we are experiencing now, you want to make sure that you have your fungicide. It's good to have a regime where every 2 weeks or so you're going to go in and put in some protection onto your foliage there, because you tend to, the wet conditions, the cooler periods are usually more ideal for the diseases, fungal problems to flourish. Should orchids be stored indoors as opposed to outdoors? Is there such a thing as sun? Essentially, what is ideal? Let's take them in segments. Should orchids be stored indoors as opposed to outdoor? My general answer is going to be outdoor. And I say outdoor meaning outside of the house, the home, as opposed to being outdoor from a shade house. If you have a shade house, then you can keep the shade loving plants inside your shade house. But in principle, outdoor is best. When your orchids stay indoor in your house, your living room, dining room, kitchen, or wherever indoor that you keep them, you increase the probability that they could die. If you were to take a dendrobium with lovely blooms inside, say next week for the Christmas, and you have it sitting there in your living room up to the middle of January, what you'll notice is that you start seeing leaves falling off because you have insects or disease or just a general condition that's not ideal for them. Is there such thing as too much sun? Yes, in fact, you can have too much sun. The phalaenopsis, if they get in contact with the direct sun, they will scorch the leaves. And in some cases, depending on the intensity of the sun, you could have it burning off. They'll just get into a deep whitish, brownish appearance, and you could lose your foliages like that. So too much sun for the shade loving plants like the phalaenopsis and your oncidiums and your shade vanda is definitely not something you want to encourage. There is nothing too much sun for your mocaras and your vanda terets, however. And here we have another question, Abby, but what is in the tag? There are times when you may have a little variation. You know, human error may have taken place, and sometimes even the kind of nutrient conditions under which you regime that you have may have caused some variation. But certainly we would want to have your direct feedback whenever you have such an experience so we can feed them back to our supplier. But for the best part, they usually come true to form. That would have been more of an exception than the rule. But most persons would send their orchids and they're just usually in awe on the quality of the blooms that they get. So my experience and the experience of most of our customers is that they are true to form. So if you have purchased from us and you had any slight variation, we do apologize. Sometimes the printing of the tags with the colors give a little variation from a deep purple versus a light purple. So we'll have to make sure that there's continuous work in ensuring that the color is as close as possible to the real actual blooms that you will get. And I would say 9 out of 10 times or 99% of the times they're true to form. And if you purchase from us, then we definitely appreciate it and look forward to you back to get some more exciting colors in 2050, because we certainly intend to offer you more exciting orchids in 2050. So in wrapping up, we carry a wide range of orchids, shade loving, those that are semi-shade, and those that are sun. And the range varies from time to time, but the popular ones that we have consistently are the vandas, the shade vandas, the sun vandas, the mocaras, which are sunnies, to the oncidiums, catalea, phalaenopsis, and dendrobium. From time to time, we'll bring other little exotics like the papilopedilum and a few others. Cymbidium. Cymbidium is one which we bring in occasionally, but those definitely do best in the cooler areas. Higher altitude is usually best for the blooming. Dendrobium noble is also one that does better at a higher altitude. So we have to be very careful which ones we introduce. Last question. I saw you on Grow It Yourself talking about thrips. So my flower buds on my phals did not seem to have developed fully. Is this thrips the cause? There's a possibility it could be. There's a high probability it could be. So if you were to purchase NGO or Caratizion, and you were to do 2 or 3 consecutive treatments at, say, 7 days interval, you should see a difference, and put on your fertilizer, then you should see a difference in a few weeks or months time. And happy gardening. Thank you so much for joining, and it was a pleasure chatting with you all, and I do look forward to further follow-up questions.